Canada's southern neighbor may get much more attention in popular media, but the Great White North has more than its fair share of mysteries. These include everything from unsolved disappearances to murders to UFOs and the paranormal. These are 5 mysteries from Canada. Number 5. The Niagara Falls region of Ontario, Canada is home to not one, but 2 ghost tunnels. The most famous, and the one still accessible today, is known as the Screaming Tunnel. The tunnel is a relatively short passage that runs beneath what was once the Grand Trunk railway line. It was originally built to let floodwater drain through, and there's still a stream of water running through it. Farmers soon began using the tunnel to travel from one side of the tracks to the other, and it now connects a small cul-de-sac to a footpath on the other side. According to local urban legends, the Screaming Tunnel got its name from a girl who burned to death in the tunnel. The exact details of what happened change from telling to telling, but one of the earliest versions of the story consisted of the barn where the girl lived being burned down and the unknown girl fleeing to the water beneath the tunnel to try to douse herself. She didn't make it in time and died in the stream. Her spirit is said to still linger beneath the tunnel, and apparently she has an understandable fear of fire. The one thing all the stories have in common is that if a visitor stands in the center of the tunnel, turns off a light-emitting device, and strikes a match, the spirit of the girl will blow it out. Occasionally, this is even joined by a bone-chilling scream coming from the darkness. Another story behind the Screaming Tunnel is that the spirit is that of a woman who lived in a village that had once stood on one side of the tunnel. She and her husband would constantly argue, and the woman would come to the tunnel to scream. The screams were filled with so much hatred that they continue to echo to this day. As one of the most well-known haunted locations in Canada, the tunnel has been visited by multiple paranormal investigators, and the apparently paranormal phenomenon has been witnessed by thousands of people. Graffiti covers the walls both inside and outside the tunnel, some indicating cult rituals have taken place due to the location's paranormal activity. Whether either story has any grounds in reality is likely lost to time, but that doesn't stop the Screaming Tunnel from being a truly eerie place. Number 4. It's now more than 15 years since 2 successful attorneys disappeared in Lake Huron, and their families are no closer to finding out what really happened to them. Lena Stempien and her boyfriend Charles Rutherford were both experienced boaters. Lena was especially safety cautious, having been taught about boat safety by her father, a retired Coast Guard officer. In August of 2005, the couple were staying at Lena's parents' cottage on Bell River in Ontario. 2 days into their trip, they set sail to Lake Huron, with plans to stay close to the coast and travel to Mackinac Island. They were last seen at 12:45 p.m. on April 11th, motoring into winds after refueling at Presque Isle Harbor. About an hour later, Lena called her aunt. There wasn't any problem, but the two spent 15 minutes chatting about their day, and Lena told her that they were about 2 hours away from Mackinac Island. She was apparently in good spirits, and Lena's aunt didn't detect anything wrong, but the couple never made it to Mackinac Island. When they hadn't heard from her the following morning, Lena's family alerted the Coast Guard, and it wasn't long before their boat, Sea's Life, was found adrift in the middle of the lake. The engine was idling in neutral and the stereo was playing, but there were no signs of Lena or Charles. At first, it seemed like the couple had jumped into the water with plans to return, but a closer inspection made that unlikely. The swim ladder on the boat was up, not down as it would be if someone expected to get back on the boat after a swim, and conditions would not have been suitable. There were also few signs of a struggle aboard the boat, and it seemed like the boat's tracking device had been tampered with. 2 weeks later, Lena's body washed ashore. She was completely nude with the exception of her jewelry. Most notable was a non-waterproof watch, which Lena's family said she cherished and would not have willingly gotten into the water wearing. She had elevated levels of carbon monoxide in her blood, but an autopsy concluded her cause of death was drowning. Charles's body has never been found. All sorts of theories have been suggested, including that Charles was in some way responsible for his girlfriend's death, or that someone else attacked them while they were on the lake. For now, the disappearance and death remains unsolved. Number 3. On November 29, 1980, Granger Taylor left a note for his parents, telling them he was going on a 42-month interstellar voyage and left their farm on Vancouver Island. Neither he nor his pink Datsun truck has been found since. Granger was known as a quiet but eccentric young man. He dropped out of school when he was 14 years old and became a self-taught mechanic. He was known among his friends and family as having an uncanny ability to fix anything, including overhauling bulldozers, restoring steam locomotives, and even restoring a World War II Kitty Hawk. But Granger also had another interest: extraterrestrials. Granger was swept up in developing UFO culture, including sightings and stories of alien abductions. He told his friends he wanted to build his own spacecraft and had recurring dreams about aliens. About a month before he disappeared, Granger told another friend he was in direct contact with aliens. The spacecraft he had built seemed to be little more than a den in the woods built from scrap metal, but Granger spent a lot of time lying on the couch he had there and thinking. It was there that he allegedly received mental communication from extraterrestrials. These mental communications can probably be explained by the large amounts of recreational drugs he was known to be taking at the time, including LSD. While drugs may explain why he thought he was speaking to aliens, it doesn't explain where he went when he claimed to be going on a voyage with them. For years, Granger's friends and family searched for him and his vehicle. In March of 1986, a blast site was found by forestry workers not far from Granger's home. Fragments of human bone were found at the site, and though they were never identified as belonging to Granger, an official coroner's report deemed that there was enough circumstantial evidence to conclude Granger had been killed. Given the very limited evidence, many don't believe this conclusion, and it's unlikely we'll ever get a definitive answer about what really happened unless Granger makes his overdue return from his voyage. Number 2. The murder of 44-year-old Cindy James is probably the most infamous unsolved murder in Canadian history. Cindy had been a nurse who loved her job and was especially good at helping children with emotional problems. When she was 19 years old, she married a doctor almost twice her age, and for more than 10 years, everything seemed fine. However, in 1982, Cindy divorced her husband. 4 months later, the harassment began. It started with threatening letters and phone calls at first, and the only people Cindy told were her parents. When the threats turned into death threats, she contacted police, but the harassment escalated. Cindy reported seeing prowlers outside her house, windows and telephone wires cut, and 3 dead cats were found hanging in her garden. She was also physically attacked multiple times, including 2 occasions when Cindy was found incapacitated with a nylon stocking tied around her throat. Police continued to investigate, but as time passed and the harassment became more and more extreme, they started to believe she was making the whole thing up. Private investigators gave Cindy a 2-way radio and installed a panic button in her home. One night, they noticed a strange noise coming from the radio. When they visited her home, they found Cindy on the hallway floor with a knife through her hand and a note saying, "You are dead." Cindy was taken to the hospital where she recovered. The only thing she could remember was a needle being put in her arm. Police didn't take fingerprints because they were now certain that this was Cindy's own doing, though the private investigator was certain nobody could have done something like this to themselves. Cindy's mental health rapidly deteriorated, and on May 25, 1989, she disappeared. Her car was discovered outside of a shopping mall not far from her home, with groceries and a wrapped gift in the back seat. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that her body would be found. Cindy was found in the front yard of an abandoned house, her hands and feet tied behind her back, and nylon wrapped around her neck. She also had numerous wounds, including an injection mark on her arm. The cause of death was found to be morphine and other drugs she overdosed on. While the house itself was vacant, the area received pretty heavy foot traffic, making it unlikely Cindy had been there for very long. However, an autopsy discovered she likely died the day she went missing. Police concluded her death was either a suicide or an accident, though the coroner and Cindy's friends and family ruled this out. Cindy's ex-husband was investigated, but it seemed he was also the victim of a stalker, having received multiple death threats. Cindy's family continued to search for the truth. Number 1. In 1878, 19-year-old Esther Cox became the victim of a violent poltergeist that seemingly wanted to kill her. The haunting became known as the Great Amherst Mystery and was turned into a book by Walter Hubble, who was staying with Esther and her family when the activity began. Up until August of 1878, nothing unusual happened to Esther or her family, and there were no signs of any paranormal activity. That changed after Esther was attacked by a male friend. Luckily, she managed to escape with only minor injuries, but the real-world attack apparently opened the door for something else entirely. Not long after the attack, the paranormal activity began, with a strange shape moving under the covers of the bed Esther shared with her sister, Jeannie. Both girls had seen something moving, prompting screams of terror that alerted the rest of the household. The next day, the family again heard screams from the two young women, who this time claimed they'd heard strange noises coming from a box under the bed. When they took the box out, it jumped into the air and landed on its side. When the women tried to right the box, it jumped again. The first 2 nights of activity could be chalked up to Esther and Jeannie having active imaginations, but on the 3rd night, things escalated even further. Esther went to bed feeling a bit feverish. At 10 p.m., she jumped back out of bed, tearing at her nightclothes and screaming that she was dying. The rest of the family came in to find Esther's skin bright red and swelling. She seemed to choke and struggle to breathe, and her sisters helped her back to bed. She was also incredibly hot to the touch. It was only when a series of loud bangs sounded from under the bed that the swelling subsided and Esther fell asleep. The events repeated themselves every night for the rest of the week, and Esther's brother-in-law hired a doctor to try to treat her. There was nothing the doctor could do but corroborate the story. He also apparently saw the words "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill" etched themselves into the wall above her bed. Esther tried to spare her family by moving out of the house and picked up work at a farm. This activity apparently followed her there, and when a barn was burnt down, she was arrested for arson. She was found guilty and sentenced to 4 months in prison, but was released after 1 month. After this, the activity apparently subsided, with only a few minor instances before the haunting completely stopped, and Esther was allowed to live the rest of her life in peace. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.